just to talk about a little bit what we're going to try to do in today's session is we want to cover the installation of the workspace and then talk about the folder structure a little bit, what is where, that type of thing to help you somewhat get your feet wet. And we'll talk a little bit about title block integration, and we'll also talk a little bit about the folder structure itself, like I mentioned, and then a couple of things at the end that are somewhat important, a couple of announcements on what's up and coming. So just bear with me. If you've already got it installed, you've already been using it, just hang loose and we'll get to some stuff that I think will be beneficial. And then next month, we're going to be focusing more on how do we supplement the workspace. And so that might be for, the consultants or maybe some of the USACE users internally that they need to add some of their own district information. And so we'll be talking about that one in October's Coffee Corner. So to get started, the first thing we want to talk about is how do I get the workspace? So again, just bear with me if you've already been using it. And we're going to just kind of walk through these steps pretty quickly for the average user. There are going to be some links that I present that Scott's going to make available towards the end. And so this is the first one, the CAD/BIM site, where you can download the AEC workspace. And so that is here. You'll see that the download here for the 4.0.4, which was released last February. And so that's going to be down the linkable. And then we're going to be talking also about these additional PDF files here. One that is fairly new that you may not be aware of is this supplementation guide. The first one and the third one here, the installation guide and the application users manual, we'll be looking at those today and talk about what's in those. Those are actually delivered with the workspace, but the supplementation guide, basically how do I add my stuff to the workspace, was written later, post-release. And so we put that download link here if you weren't available on that information, if you didn't know that it's where it's at. So this is our download. And when we download, we're going to talk about, what we do once we have that file downloaded. And so if we take a look at, an Explorer, you're going to be given this zip file, okay? And one of the things that you're going to learn in your installation manual is how do I unzip that for a local installation. So it covers the local installation, it covers the network installation, and it also covers the project-wise installation. So again, this is downloadable from the CAD/BIM site, all right? And first thing it's going to talk you through is unzipping the file. And this is important too, is what versions are supported. And just to kind of give you a prelude, we are working on a 5.0 workspace. The workspace is actually done, and we're in our final certification phase to hope to wrap that up here in a few days. And we're going to be passing that over to the Army Corps for them to do their testing. And everything will be done with 2023 products. So MicroStation 2023, Open Roads 2023, Open Buildings, and Pro Structures 2023. So we are working on upgrading. We do realize we're a little bit behind, and so we're going to be catching up very shortly. But we decided to take everything to 2023 to make it more consistent. So I can't give you a timeline because that's going to be based on the Army Corps' implementation. But just to know that we're getting very close to Bentley's going to pass that workspace over for them to be able to use that. So, all right, so to continue on, these are the versions that the 4.0 workspace is certified on. If you try to use it on another version and you go to your AEC menu, check compatibility, you're going to get a warning message saying, hey, essentially you're trying to use something that's not certified. It may or may not work. And so just be aware of that, okay? And that's under the AEC menu, check compatibility. You'll see here is the 5.0 workspace. So you won't have this yet. You'll have the 4.40, but it works the same. All right. All right, so coming on down, this is going to explain the local installation. I'm not going to read this to you. I'm not going to waste our time reading the document to you. It's more about showing you what documentation we have and what is in that documentation. So I'm going to go through this part fairly quickly, but it talks about unzipping or extracting. And I recommended in this document to use 7-zip. It's a free unzipping utility, and it allows you to use the stored folders. I get a lot of people that will try to extract this to someplace other than where we, have it linked up to originally, so which is program data AECWS, and they'll put some big path in there. Well, the problem is some of these paths get really long, and then all of a sudden you can't move files around or it can't extract the files. So I would recommend, at least if you're doing the installation setup in your environment, just use the 7-zip, extract a C:\/ with the settings here in the document, using the full path names here, and it will go ahead and put everything in the right location. Okay. Then it walks you through just a verification to make sure that everything is in the right folder path, and talks about in Explorer you can turn on the hidden items to be able to see the program data folder. The next step it talks about is verifying that your configuration setup.cfg files are pointing to the local workspace, and that's this file. You'll see the path up here I have for Open Roads Designer 10.12. You'll have one from MicroStation and Pro Structures and Open Buildings as well. But basically what we're talking about is adding this piece of text, and that is in your zip file. And what that does is when you go to open the product, let me close this, then you're going to get a new entry here called custom configuration, where you can pick the AEC English Workspace, and then we have a couple delivered templates. The documents will talk you through making your own work set, of course. These are the work sets that you would copy from to make your own work set for your own projects. But once you have the configuration set up in the configuration file from the zip, this is what you should be seeing in Open Roads. So that's what we're doing with that configuration setup. And that walks you through setting or making those changes or verifying those changes got put in there. Then this shows you what I just represented, what you can do to test to make sure that everything is loading properly for a local installation. Then it comes down into the network installation. And on the network installation, that's on pages 9 through 15. Basically, it's taking the C:\program data AECWS folder structure, and it's moving it either to a mapped drive, like I have an example here for R:\agency standards, or a UNC path, and you can put your computer name and your share name, that type of thing. So it gives you a couple of real examples of what you can do in terms of moving that out onto the network for other people to share the workspace as well. We go to the same process, though, for modifying that configuration setup file. This time you would have to modify it because what we're delivering in the zip file is set up to go to C:\program data AEC, and where we're going to be taking this here to the network or to a shared environment, you would have to modify that configuration variable to point to this new location. And so that's what we're talking about here. And then it tells you what files that you need to copy to bring those over. And then you also have some options to relocate your project data location. You don't have to put your workspaces and your work sets with the workspace configuration itself. You can separate them, and this document explains the process for going through that. And if you do modify your project information, like where your work sets are, then you'll have to make some changes to your configuration files. Again, I'm not going to read through all this. I'm assuming a lot of you already have this up and running, just trying to make you aware of what's in this documentation. Okay, and this is talking about modifying your configurations for where you want to relocate your projects to. And so, for example, I'm just going to highlight one here. If I wanted to put everything in R:\agency standards, and I wanted to put my workspaces here, then this is the configuration file that I would modify. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. And then lastly is if you wanted to go the full-blown managed workspace project-wise installation, this is going to walk you through those steps. I'm not a project-wise expert, so I'm not going to pretend to be. I had this portion of the document developed by one of my colleagues that is an expert in project-wise, but this will walk you through the steps for doing that. So let me go down to the last section here that it talks about. This is all, again, project-wise setup. Okay, and then that will take you down to the end. So that's basically what is in this AEC workspace installation. And I wanted you just to be aware that that is in there. And I'm going to go back and forth into looking at some important links. So let me bring this back up real quick. There is, and Scott's going to provide these later, there is a series of links where we have a knowledge base, and we'll get into these links a little bit more in the October Coffee Corner as well. But they're kind of broken up into categories. So this is like introduction and customization videos. Here's some plan and profile stuff. You want to learn how to cut your sheets. And then this one is all about the civil cells. So you've got individual links where they're kind of categorized, or we have a YouTube playlist where everything is out there in one, basically in the order that I provided the videos. And so it's interesting to me that we already are getting some have over 100 views, and we haven't even advertised this yet. So kudos to everybody out there that's coming across these on our technical support link. Thank you to Kevin McDonald for making these available. They're available internally for the USACE team, but they weren't made available for the external customers. And so for the USACE side, you don't necessarily have to use the links that we're going to give you today. They're actually in the product. There is a link that you can go to each of these locations, and it'll take you out there where you have to log in, and it'll provide you all of those. But just for the USACE users, under the AEC menu, then under links, there is this AEC Bentley resource board. So if you're a USACE user, you'll want to be very familiar with getting into that link. The rest of these links are applicable to both USACE users and external consultants, either one. So just be aware of that. Okay, so that kind of takes us down and shows us what is in this particular document that we provide as part of the Workspace download. And just to show you where those documents reside, they're under the configuration sets and then the docs folder. And so you'll see the different PDF files in there as well. And also, if you weren't for sure about what software version, that's in this Word document. You can look that up also. Okay, so let's jump over now. Talked about the installation manual. I'm just kind of looking at my notes on the other screen. So now we're going to jump over to the user's manual. All right, so the user's manual is broken up into several sections. The first section is going to be talking about how we create a local project. Okay, so how do we get started creating that local project? And so we can see that in the table of contents. But here's our new project creation. And basically what you're doing, I'll just give you the 10,000 foot level, is we deliver some of these templates already. And just to show you where those are at live, they're under workspaces, and then they are under work sets. And then you will see what we're talking about copying here is we have these AEC International Foot or AEC Survey Foot templates. And so you'll be grabbing that along with the configuration file that has the same name. And you'll be copying that information and pasting that to where you want your projects to be. And so that's what this is talking about, grabbing that particular folder structure, and you'll see the path there, the work sets path, and you'll grab whatever set of units that you're working with. and copy and paste those. And so that's what this section's talking about, is creating your own project and then renaming it. And so when you first copy that in there, it's going to give it a copy extension, and then you'll want to go ahead and give that a real name. For example, I just called it something simple like Route 123. And then once you create your own work set, or sometimes people call it a project, then you should be able to, in the interface, be able to see that then as a dropdown. So you'll still have your workspace of AEC English Workspace, but what's different is what's customizable is your work set entry, and that's where you would select what you created in the prior steps. So the template sets up all your folder structure for you, your configurations, and all you have to do is copy, paste, and rename. And so again, that's all in this this manual that we're looking at now, which is the application user manual for Workspace 4. This is kind of a repetitive process, but in reality, if you're not running a project-wise managed workspace, you're probably going to be storing your projects on a network location. And so this is going through the same steps, but it's putting it either on a mapped drive or on a UNC path, which is probably more typical, at least in the consultant world, where you can share that project data. And so it's doing the same thing. It's going to your local install. It's grabbing the appropriate template for the folder structure, and then it's going in and pasting that out on your mapped drive. You'll see that here. And then we will rename them just like we did before. Now there's a couple of options in terms of where you want to store your configuration files for your projects if you're going to put them out on the network. And so I've given you two options here. And so don't let that confuse you. Just kind of look at the header here, like this is option 1, work set relocation method, and then there's an option 2. And it just depends on, do you want to keep everything together, or do you want to keep everything separated? So that's basically the difference between those two options. And this is just talking about copying that configuration file out there in their proper location and renaming it. And so then we go down to option 2, where you can put everything, in the location that goes with the work sets individually. And so again, just a couple of different options there. So that's what we're talking about here. And then the same step where you've done it locally, then you would do the verification, where you should see that new work set that's out there on your server, and you should then be able to select that if you follow those steps. All right, so then the last section is that's relevant to the installation and creation of your projects is if I wanted to do that in ProjectWise itself. And so there is some documentation in here. I know that internally for USACE, I've been working with a couple of people. They have some additional documentation that's intended just for internal only, and I think that they're working on making that available on your internal site. So if you have any questions on that, you might want to touch base with Steven Spangler. I'm sure that from the USACE users, you're probably all familiar with him. He would be able to guide you in project creation if you're not sure. But this is more for your external customers. If you want to create your projects in ProjectWise, if you have that managed workspace, this will walk you through the same steps. And it's basically the same process. You're going to be copying your templates, and in this case, uploading that to ProjectWise. And then there's a couple extra steps you have to do down here with this highlighted folder that it will walk you through. So this is getting it set up in ProjectWise, and then setting up your configuration blocks. So we'll move on from that. Again, it's step by step. I didn't write this part of the manual, but it should be pretty easy to follow. And then the last section, and I want to give a precursor on this one. I have had users ask, Chuck, why is there text on top of text in my title blocks? For those of you that have been using the managed workspace or the USACE workspace. And that's because if you're working outside of ProjectWise, we have to use MicroStation fields. If you're working inside of ProjectWise, we have to use MicroStation tags to get the title block integration. that is something that is going to change. It won't change in the 5.0 workspace. We're going to need new builds of all of our products to get that done properly. And they're still fine tuning those changes. And so we're still a ways off, but eventually that's going to be done through what we call item types. And item types are simply attributes that we place on that text that we put into our title blocks, and so it'll replace that text, that placeholder text, with the information from the item types. And so that'll allow us to get away from microstation fields and microstation tags and just use item types everywhere. So when we make that change, you will no longer have two different levels to manage in your title blocks. It's just going to be a little bit before we have all the technology in place. And so just to give you a heads up, that is coming down the road. Now, for what we have today, for a local installation and usage, like you're running the managed workspace off of your hard drive or off of a local server and not in ProjectWise, then you will be using fields. And so this application manual walks you through what the different fields are, where you adjust those fields, and so it talks about how you access the advanced properties and you fill in your data. And this part's pretty much the same. Just it's going to be done in different places. Okay, so this is the fields part where you're running locally, and just gives you some recommendations on how to do that. This is your sheet model property fields. You have work set property fields that you have to fill in as well. And so this explains all the steps for completing your title blocks. Then it goes into the same scenario, but this time I'm running a managed workspace and I'm doing my project inside of ProjectWise. And so this gives you an introduction to that scenario. Now we're using the title block attribute exchange using microstation tags. And so it's going to talk to you about how you modify. So these are what the screens would look like, and you'll put your values in. So it's going to be the same questions. It's just different dialogues. And then when you apply that information, it pushes that tag information down to your title blocks and completes those. And so you'll see like in a completed example here where that's pushed down. All right. And then it shows you how you can make edits, once you have things done. Then we have an icon if you're running ProjectWise that will show up, and you can say modify title block or update title block from ProjectWise. So you didn't see that on my screen earlier because I'm not running ProjectWise, but if you are running ProjectWise, you'll see these two additional icons, and this explains what those do. Okay. The last thing here in the application document is it talks about what to do if you see this question. Be careful with this question and make sure that you read it. Sometimes a file might be associated with a different work set, but yet you're bringing it over to your work set or your project. Make sure you read this, because by default, it's going to try to open it on the old work set. Or you have to go hit this radio button and say, hey, let's go ahead and use the active workspace, and it'll go ahead and switch you over. So just pay special attention when you see that work set mismatch dialog, and make sure it's doing what you want it to do. Okay. All right, so that's kind of an introduction to the application manual. And again, that's downloadable from the CAD BIM site, and it is also available again. As I mentioned earlier, once you unzip the workspace, it's available in this docs folder. Now, what is not going to be in your docs folder is the supplementation guide. Okay, and now we're going to study the supplementation guide in the next Coffee Corner in October. So if you're like, well, Chuck, I've downloaded this workspace and I've unzipped it and I don't have the supplementation guide, that's because it was done after the workspace was released. And so that's why we put that on the CAD BIM site for you to be able to download. Okay. All right, so now I want to go back before I move forward any further. The last thing I want to do is we're really going to dig into the folders. But before I do that, I just want to briefly mention a little bit about these videos and the significance of these videos. So I think there's like 30 some videos out here, and some of them have well over 100 views already. I'm always looking or thinking about what topics would be beneficial. For example, how do I add a feature definition or an element template? Well, you know, that's something that you may need to know, right? If you have a particular topic that you think that, hey, I think we had a video on this topic, it would be helpful to many users, then let somebody know. For the USACE users, you can email Steve Spangler directly and ask him if we could add something like this to the video library. If you're an outside consultant and you want to email me, that's fine. Chuck.lawson@bentley.com, and I can pass it on to Stephen. He would make the decisions, but just wanted to tell you that this library is ever growing, and it's for your benefit. And so we've tried to put information out there that we think would hit most of the users. And so I think that just to reiterate, don't be afraid to request a particular topic that you think would be useful. So what we don't want to do is redo learning content material. It's like, well, this is how you design a special ditch. No, I'm talking more about how do we supplement the workspace with reports? Well, there's a video out there already for that one, adding custom reports to the workspace. But maybe there's something in there that you might want to do customization on that we haven't thought about yet. So that's kind of where I'm going with that. If you have some particular ideas that you like, we have to do this on every project. It would be nice if this were documented with a video, a few minute video. That would be helpful. So just wanted to give a heads up on that one. Okay, so the last portion of today, we're about halfway done, is I really want to dig into the explanation of the folder structure, because I can tell you that I've heard this a lot. Hey, Chuck, this folder structure seems very overwhelming, and I don't know, where do I put my stuff, and why is this folder here, and that type of thing. So what I want to do is just kind of explain the basics, and then we'll get into the supplementation next time. But I want to give you kind of the core functionality of the workspace and why we did some things the way that we did, okay? This first folder structure under AEC called _config, this is the folder structure you really need to stay away from. This one is basically a series of configuration files and INI settings files that determines what to load based on what product you are starting. So right now we support MicroStation, Open Roads, Open Buildings, and Pro Structures. And so there's a lot of what we call switches in here, or on-off type configurations that look at what you've kicked off, and then it decides what it's going to load. So I would never recommend anybody coming in here and doing anything unless you are very, very knowledgeable on workspace development. So this would be something that you probably need to stay away from, okay? So just a little tip on that one. And while I'm thinking about it, you'll see here I've got an AEC Workspace 5. We're not going to call the next release _5, but I'm separating them for my own sanity. We're really not going to be changing these folder structures, okay? So what we've done before, that's locked down now. I can't say, hey, we might add a folder or delete a folder, but everything that we change, if you're not aware, everything that we change will be listed right here. So at any point, you can come in and say, okay, well, we're going to Workspace 5 from Workspace 4. What has Bentley done to change the workspace? And so if you want to know that, this is going to be the spreadsheet. Now, if you've seen the 4.workspace, it doesn't have column D. And so what I've done is I added column D to tell what product it affects, and then I've also added filtering. So if you wanted to see all of the changes related to a particular product, you can say, well, I just want to see the changes related to Open Roads Designer, and it will filter the list based on that. And I also have a filter in here for what workspace version. And so you'll see right now that we are just have the one entry for 5, of course, but I've turned off all of the 4. Entries. And so if you're looking at 5, you don't really need to see the changes on 4, and so you can, in Excel, set that filter as well. But I will tell you that the changes are going to be fairly benign in the 5.0 workspace, mainly just a few little bug fixes here and there. Um, Most of the changes had to do with open buildings and just doing updates on the delivered workspace. There are a few things with open roads, and you can easily come in here and see what I did. But most of them are pretty basic. Okay, so there's not too many. So that's the list right now. But that again is accessible in the links and then AEC workspace change log. And that basically that Excel spreadsheet is included in the docs folder that I showed you earlier. Okay, so to continue on with the workspace folder structure, again, we've talked about this folder. This is the one you really probably need to stay away from. The configuration sets now, this is where we're getting into the actual standards. Okay. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean by that, Chuck? Well, for example, under AEC, we have English and we have metric and we have extension. So let's just expand AEC English for just a minute. So this is the USACE standards, if you will, the delivered standards. And so if I wanted to see where they stored all of their levels, okay, all of their levels are in these DGN libs right here. If I wanted to see where their text styles and their dimension styles were, they're here. Their custom line styles are here. Their element templates are here. Their item types are here, and their display styles are here. And so there's a lot in this DGN lib folder structure that has a lot of their primary MicroStation set up right here in this folder. So again, this is all AEC. Well, we also have a building structure, folder structure, and we have a civil folder structure, and we have a structural folder structure. These are the standards, the USACE standards for open building. These are the USACE standards for open roads, and these are the USACE standards for pro structures. So as you dig down into one of these folders, for example, if I want to see where they have stored all of their feature definitions, they're in this file right here. Now, your users typically won't have write access to these, so we'll talk about supplementation and how do I supplement the features. We'll talk about that next time. But this is basically, consider this like a read-only folder structure. You really should not be working in this structure, but it delivers the USACE environment. So that is the point of this AEC English or AEC metric folder structure, is the USACE delivered standards for all four products. Just a little bit of additional information. Your MicroStation cells, for example, are here, but maybe I had some cells that were specific to ORD. Those will be in here. Okay, so you'll see, well, I got a cell folder here and I've got a cell folder here. These are basically for all products, right? Because they're under the main category. Okay. Same thing with the civil. You'll have some DGN libraries in there that are related only to Open Roads Designer that you would not need for MicroStation, for example. So they're put underneath this civil folder structure. So that's just kind of a general introduction. We'll be digging deeper into that next time on supplementations. But that's the whole idea between these two, is the AC English and the AC metric. Now, what is the extension? So the extension folder structure is basically a mirrored image of what you would see under English, but it's empty. Okay, well, that doesn't sound logical. Why would you give us an empty folder structure? Well, this is where we recommend you to place district-specific standards. Okay, so let's say that I'm in a Louisville district and I have my own cell libraries that are exclusive to Louisville. I can put those in this cell folder and they will be appended to or added to this cell library list that is available under AEC English. Okay. So the extension folder structure is a mirrored image basically of AEC English, but it is empty and is intended for you to add to your particular environment. So like if I go down under, ORD and I go to feature definitions, there's nothing here but a README file. So there's just nothing in here, but it's set up and it's configured to be able to add to. Okay, so that's what the AEC extension folder structure is for. All right, and then the last couple of things I'm going to talk about, and then we'll go into questions because I'm just imagining there's quite a few questions. I have not been monitoring that, but I want to try to open it up a little bit at the end. Okay, so then the next thing we want to take a look at is what is under the workspaces, okay, the workspaces. So you'll have this AEC English, which I kind of dug into earlier, that it has under work sets, it has, these templates, one for international foot, one for survey foot. And just by the way, when you come into the workspace and you start working, you really don't want to use these work sets. These are meant to be templates that you create your own projects with. So, like I did just because I can, and say I've got some files in here that I wanted to be able to open today in case there was something in the Q&A. But essentially, these need to be remaining clean folder structures that you're not adding to or taking away from, because you want to copy these over to make your own projects. And so, the document talked about grabbing the folder and then grabbing the corresponding configuration file. Let's say, for example, we can do that and copy paste and then rename, and then you'll have your own project wherever you are storing your work sets. And so what we have in here is we have basically a template folder structure for international foot, and we have one for survey foot. If you've ever wondered what local English is for, local English is for like if you don't pick a work set and you want to have some type of minimal localized USACE information, like you want to have the levels and such, you can use the local and get some basics. I don't know that anybody's ever used that, but that was the thought process behind it. So you're typically going to be focusing probably on this one, or if you're doing pro structures or open buildings, you'll probably be working with international foot. So this is where you'll copy your template for structures from. And so that's the idea, right, is you'll have these workspaces. And so the workspace, it basically is where you would store, like under your standards here, for under your workspace, this is where you could store something like client-specific standards. Let's go back to the cell library. So let's say that you're a consultant, right, and you're going to use the AEC English workspace, but you have a title block that is a cell, right, and you want to add that to the environment. Well, it's not really a district standard, but it's more of a client standard. And so maybe, you can't even copy the workspace. And so maybe instead of AEC English workspace, maybe you call this AEC, city job or whatever. And so you can have these workspace standards where you can put some client specific information in. But again, these folder structures, again, are just an exact duplicate. They're just empty, but where you can add standards at a workspace level. And then the final level on the run is then the work set level. And so if you dive down into the work sets, and this is kind of the heart of where everything gets stored with USACE. If you've done USACE work, you recognize this folder structure. So here's models and drawings and sheets and so on. And so this is typically where things get stored in your work set. And so like when you go to open a new file, for example, it's going to default to this models subfolder. But again, your application user's manual will talk to you and show you how to copy these work sets and their corresponding configuration files to make these work sets for your particular projects. And you can substitute the name work set with projects, hey, this is my project or my set of working drawings, however you want to call it. If you're old school like me, you probably call them projects, but it's the same work sets, same thing as where you're building that information. Okay. All right. So that's kind of an introduction of what I wanted to cover. Now I'm going to give you a couple of cautionaries to be careful of. I'm going to ask you to just raise your hand to yourselves. Has anybody ever tried to do a right click and then activate reference? All right, so a right click, activate reference. So like, let's say I go to this geometry, I right click and I can get it. Try it here, right there. So when you right click on something that's in a reference file and you notice that my option is gone, that's because I've disabled activate reference. We found out not too long ago during certification that activate reference can corrupt files. And I know a lot of consultants are already aware of this. If you're using activate reference, you need to stop because you're just going to need to do an exchange or open the file directly. But avoid the activate reference. Without going into too many details, we've been chasing this for a long time. We found it. We are working on fixing it, but the problem is there's an infinite possibility of what can happen when you activate a reference. And so it's going to be hard to solve everything. And so we felt it was best just to decommission the activate option. And so in the 5.0 workspace, activate will no longer be an option. But I want you to think you're losing your mind. We're protecting you from corrupting files. And so it is something we're working on. It will be better with the 2024 release, but to say that it's going to be taking care of everything would be an overstatement right now. So if you start to catch wind of that, I know on the agency meetings that we have with the DOTs, we're going to be announcing it. So just be careful and please do not be using the activate reference. If you've already used it, be careful because it can corrupt files and you may not see that corruption for days or weeks later. And so just be aware of that. Another announcement is in the 5.0 workspace, I found a little glitch where when we map survey, some things were not going to the feature code they were supposed to. And that was traced back to an issue with one of the configurations. And so that has been fixed in the 5.0 workspace. So like if you're like, well, I'm mapping this and it's not going to the right place, we have found and fixed that. The last thing that I wanted you to be aware of is in our delivered workspace, I'm going to go down to 2024. This has not been released yet, but they're working on getting it ready. There is a particular macro called ViewSet. And what ViewSet does is it gives you this option to open up your views. Like some of you are probably familiar with this already, but it opens up this option to do this. There is some changes that have been made to the MicroStation platform security-wise that required us to make a few enhancements to this macro. They're very simple enhancements. But if you do move to Open Roads Designer 2024, and by the way, the 5.0 workspace will be certified on 2023, not 2024. So this is more probably information for consultants. Make sure that you if you go to 2024, grab this macro and update all of your local workspaces with this updated file. That's very important because Open Roads Designer will crash if you don't make this update. So we're trying to be very proactive with this announcement and just, to say, hey, if you go to do the right click and you crash, you need to get the latest viewset.mvba that we deliver and update all of your local workspaces. So that's just a side tip of where we're going with this next release on that particular file. So very important. Okay, with that, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can take a look at the questions. Let me pop it back up into that real quick. And Scott, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I'm sure you're kind of going up on the questions. I'll stop sharing for a minute and see what we need to talk about, okay?
All right. So it looks like Sonia and Christiana have been addressing the questions.
There was one from Joseph. He was asking about modifying the extension. I didn't know where that CFG was. You may want to.
Okay, what was the question, Cristiano?
He was wanting to know where he could modify the CFG file for that extension part.
Okay, so that's an excellent question. Let me go ahead and share again, talk about that. And we'll get into this in the next coffee corner, but just to give you a little hint, if you will. So on the extensions, well, basically, to try to take away some of the overwhelmingness of this folder size, we have strategically located all of the configuration files at the top of that particular folder structure. So if you wanted to make some changes for the extension, here's your configuration file. Okay. And so that's done at every level. You know, if I go down to the work set, for example, let's say that I needed to make some changes for my work set. Well, here is your configuration file. So they're at the top folder of every folder structure that I demonstrated today. So if I needed to make changes to the configuration for the extension, it goes at the top of that folder structure. Okay. Great question. Thank you for that. What's next?
There's one in here that's not Workspace related. I don't know if you want to answer that one or not. I don't even know if we know the answer to that one. Do you see it, Chuck? The Q&A?
I'm looking at the Q&A. Which one would it be, Scott?
The one about the defect number.
Oh, for the reference activation? Yeah. That's from Adam. Adam, I'm not sure on the defect number. You could probably contact Derek Gray. I know you know who Derek is, I'm assuming. So derek.gray@bentley.com. He's probably been up on that. And so maybe contact him and he should be able to give that to you.
All right. Any other questions? We still got a little bit of time here. Looks like we got about 10 or 11 minutes still. So feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A area.
So here's a question from Dustin. Can the workspace be installed and used in all 3 locations? That's an interesting question, Dustin. Theoretically, yes, you can install it in, local versus a server versus a managed workspace, right? But the issue would be is how do you load it, right? So for a managed workspace, that's pretty cut and dry. That's a separate thing. And so you go to ProjectWise, you open your file, and then it's going to pull down the files and you'll be good to go. Now, if you're trying to run it off your hard drive versus a server, well, if you remember, we had to modify that configuration file to point to a specific location. So yes, you could have it in both places, but your configuration file can only point to one place at a time. And so what you'd end up having to do there is to modify that configuration file to switch. Now, there's things that you can do to kind of set that variable on the fly. That's a little bit more advanced than what we want to get into in here. But the answer to your question is theoretically yes, but you would be in that situation where you'd have to redo the configuration file if you wanted to switch over. All right, so Adam asked, is the activate reference still an issue in ORD 2024? Yes, but not nearly as bad. Okay, so we discovered it right before 2023 went out the door. And they've been working on it with 2024. But as I mentioned earlier, that there's just an infinite possibility of what could be done once you switch over. Let me give you an example, Adam, that may help you understand the complications here. Let's say that you're working on a project and somebody has gone into a geometry file and that geometry is used on a corridor, right? And they went in and they changed a radius of a curve. So they opened up geometry.dgn, they made the change, right? But they forgot to open up the corridor and have that reprocess. Well, let's say that you have a technician that's working on the sheets that have been cut. So they go in and they open up one of the sheets. Well, they open it by doing an activation. Well, as soon as you activate to that sheet, it's going to recognize that geometry's been modified and it's going to want to process the corridor. Now it doesn't know what to do because all of the civil program itself is not loaded under the hood. And so it's that was one of the problems that we fixed, right? Is how much of that civil product is running when you do an activate. And we're like, oh, okay, well, we got to load everything if they're doing an activate. So I would just, tell you that it's all fixed, no. Is it much better? Yes. Are you still taking a risk if you use it in 2024? Yes, you would still be using it or taking a risk. So I would be very careful. Okay. Okay, so David Thompson asked a question: will a project-wise environment be delivered with the new workspace for title block integration? So David, I'm not sure I exactly understand your question. I mean, implementing it in project-wise is, you can do something through Bentley. If you don't know how to set up a managed workspace, we have ways to do that. But the title block integration is already part of the workspace, but there would be some additional setup to do in project-wise, but I'm pretty sure that's covered in that document that I showed you today. Okay, so where it talks about setting up the different entries and using the tags. And so if you're not sure what you're doing on that and you need some assistance, just reach out to support and we should be able to help you out there. Okay, so Michael asked a good question. When I create a workspace through Open Roads Designer, I get the following error: invalid symbol. So basically, Michael, I may or may not be answering your question properly, but how are you creating the work set? Because when you go to that dialog, there is an option there that says create work set. We don't want you doing that. We want you following what's in the document, where you are actually copying the folder structure and the configuration file and renaming it. What I'm talking about is this button right here. Don't do this, okay? Because this can cause some issues. I don't know if that's what you're doing, Michael. I don't have time to pursue it in this call, but don't do this, but follow the document where we're manually copying the folder structure and the configuration files and renaming things, and that may help. If that doesn't help, then go ahead and log a ticket with Steven Spangler since you're at USACE, and we should be able to get back with you, okay? All right, so here's a question from Stanley. I'm going to read this out loud. From a consultant's perspective, the AEC extension would vary based on the district. Would the best alternative for this be to create district workspaces based on the default and then add specific district standards there? Yes, I believe so. This question has come up a couple of times in the past, Tim. I think I have a video somewhere where what if I wanted like two different extensions, maybe District 3 and District 4. You can email me. I think I did do a video on that if that is something of interest to you. Let me know. Again, chuck.lawson@bentley.com, and I think I know where that video's at. I can send it to you and show you what I figured out on that topic. So that has been asked before by a couple people. All right. Let's see what else we got in here. All right, so I think there is a question here from Joseph. If we update one of the reference resource file names for a project, for example, like a template library or border reference or something, what would we need to change to tell the software what the new file name is? Well, I'm going to tell you, be careful with that one, Joseph, because especially like if you're doing something with a file that is civil based. So like if it's a geometry file or a corridor file, those types of things you need to be very careful of. If it's a template library and you want to rename the template library or a border reference, on those particular things, you're basically going to have to go back and just repick the new file name, like in a template library example, or like if you got a border reference, then you may have to go correct your attachment reference. And so I know it's sometimes things need to be renamed, but it just depends on where that file is being used or how it's being used as to what you need to do. So just keep that in mind, okay? But definitely you want to avoid renaming things that have anything civil, because those files get linked together with an internal, I think it's called a GUID, like a graphical user interface ID number or something. And so if you rename it, it's not going to be able to find it. And so be really careful, anything that's tied to civil. Okay, so Michael, if I were to create a new feature definition for a train model, where would I store it? We will cover that in our next coffee corner. So that's going to be all about supplementing the workspace, Michael. So that's a good question. Okay, Robert, you've asked a question. I'm not sure exactly what you mean. In the sheet generation, going to use the cells to define the work areas. The current labels for saved views are not long enough for the saved views. I'm not exactly sure on your question. If you want to follow them up with a more detailed email to me with some screen captures or maybe a quick video, I'd be happy to reply to you on that, Robert. So apologize, just not quite grasping on that one. The goal of these two coffee corners is to take the intimidation factor away from, let's face it, a really big workspace, and also to show you how to properly supplement it and to show what documentation and help is out there for you already. So we tried to think about some of the questions and head those off with the documents and the videos. So we'll dive into the supplementation document next time, and I'll do some real examples. And I think that that will really start bringing it all together for you. So I really hope that this was beneficial to you all, and may have been repetitive for some of you all, but I think that you'll be able to use this and what we have the next time to be able to really reinforce that.